Professor Brown. I want to ask you what inspired you to have a understanding of Ambedkarite movement in India, particularly hailing from a African American background and visiting India. How long have you been doing this?
I first came to India in 1996. I was a Fulbright scholar, and Fulbright is a program, it's a national program in the United States, very competitive, and they provide support for academics who go overseas. So I had applied to one to come here to India. And you know, it turns out when I did it, I only knew one Indian in my life. It was actually my ex-wife's friend at work. But it turned out that he was the son of one of the justices of the Indian Supreme Court. So when she let him know that I was going to apply for the Fulbright, he contacted his father. And his father contacted the National Law School in Bangalore to make sure that they supported my application. So my application was very strong on all other grounds, so that allowed me to be ranked very high among the Fulbright applicants to India. Unfortunately, though I was ranked very high, the way Fulbright at that time worked is the full Fulbright board is appointed by the President of the United States, so we have 3 members. And George Bush had been defeated in the election in '92, but Bill Clinton had not yet gotten around to replacing his people on the Fulbright board. My application was denied, even though it was so strong. And it turned out that it was an African American woman who was in charge of the Fulbrighters coming to India. So when this happened, she investigated and found out that the reason it was turned down was at the time I was married to my second wife, who was white. And the Bush appointees on the Fulbright board said, we don't want this black man married to a white woman talking about race in India.
Okay.
So she waited until after Clinton made his appointments, took my application back up, and then I was funded. So in some sense, it was this happenstance, you know, perhaps I'll maybe fated, because I came to India, I learned about the Dalit struggle, and I learned about from Dr. Jaffet, who was the only Dalit professor of Indian descent at the National Law School where I was assigned.
Okay.
And my office was next to his. So I remember the second weekend I was in Bangalore, he took me to a rally of 80,000 Dalit Christians in Bangalore, and they wanted to change the Indian Constitution.
Yes.
But what struck me, of course, was that there was one sign above the speaker's podium, "We shall overcome." And there were 3 speakers, one of them spoke English. And he started by saying, I'm a Dalit Panther. We take the name Panther from the Black Panthers in the United States because we see ourselves as one with the African American struggle. And that really surprised me. I had not known about that. So that kind of connected me to the struggle. Sometimes later, I would find out that I was born the evening of October 13, 1956.
Okay.
In the United States, which if you adjust for the time difference.
14th October, yes.
Yes. So as Dalits were converting to Buddhism, I was being born. So it might have all been fated.
Okay. So that's a very interesting thing that, you know, you linked your birthday and that Dr. Ambedkar with millions of other people embraced Buddhism in Nagpur, 14th of October 1956. How much Dr. Ambedkar is known among the African Americans?
Well, that's a different question. Not just African Americans, Americans themselves are nationalist people. You know, it's a country that was separated by 2 oceans. So in some sense, it grew up on an island. So Americans, almost from the very beginning, developed a culture that privileged what was going on in America as opposed to the rest of the world. So the American population in general is not very aware of international events. African Americans is a group of people created on American soil. So our focus is even more national than most Americans. So when African Americans do think globally, we almost always think in terms of Africa. Rarely Asia, rarely India. Dr. Ambedkar is not well known among African Americans, indeed neither is the Dalit struggle. Certainly one of my major goals in life is to change that, is to publicize the Dalit struggle among my people. But I'd say right now it's not very well known.
But as have you come across anything about Dr. Ambedkar when he was a student in Columbia University? Has he ever said or participated anything about the Dalit, the Black movement? Or is there any literature available?
There's certainly references. He communicated with W.B. Du Bois about the possibility of bringing both the African American struggle and the Dalit struggle in front of the UN. Deep understanding of Dr. Ambedkar, which of course is a shame because Ambedkar was just an extraordinary human being. To think of someone who could have thought through the challenges that Dalits faced in such a clear way.
Yes.
And having grown up in that struggle, but to be able to do that, I have to say I still find it extraordinary. I've read all the major philosophers, political scientists. I don't find anyone who's displayed the same kind of intellectual abilities as Ambedkar has done. It's really just extraordinary. And once again, this is one of the other things I'm trying to bring to my people is knowledge of just how extraordinary Ambedkar was.
But what happened is that if you go to even Africa, I visited some of the countries and the United States, speaking to many of the African American origin people or African origin people from other countries also, their first impression about India is about Gandhi. And most of the time, if they're coming to Delhi and they come from Nigeria, from Senegal, from any other country, and they say, oh, we felt that we are going to the nation of Gandhi. And this Gandhi's work with the Dalits or maybe for the blacks or whatever is also used kind of what Martin Luther King said about him. I was quite surprised had Martin Luther King not come in touch with Ambedkar or through his writings, because they are quite contemporary that way. If you could know Gandhi,
as far as we know, we don't think Dr. King was very aware of the Dalit struggle.
Yes.
He was aware of Gandhi and constantly paid tribute to Gandhi's nonviolent violence and talked about nonviolence, brought it into the civil rights struggle. And that's why Gandhi has a much higher recognition among African Americans. The other thing, quite frankly, is there was a movie that was made of Gandhi's life back in 1982 that was an extraordinary box office.
Yes. Richard Attenborough's.
Yes. So most Americans' view of Gandhi is shaped by that movie. And even when you go to the point in the movie where they're talking about the creation of the Pune Pact, it doesn't really convey to you what that meant to the Dalits. So Gandhi is seen as more a major supporter of Dalits. When I have conversations with African Americans about Dalit cause, I always start with, well, you have to understand Gandhi was not a friend of the Dalits, despite what most people here in America believe. But I think that's going to be a difficult one to overcome. I think because the African American community, when they think of Gandhi, think of him in terms of his nonviolence with King.
Yes.
They're not aware of Gandhi, the racist, what Gandhi did in South Africa, how he, by accepting the deal he had with the British,
Yes.
effectively sold out the black South Africans who would then do very poorly under apartheid, whereas the Indian community in South Africa do very well.
Yes.
That's a difficult one because of the strong association of nonviolence in the community.
Yeah, that's there actually. When we were talking about King and Malcolm X dialogue, this brings to the picture the Gandhi Ambedkar issue and the King Malcolm X issue in America.
Yeah.
And that brings to the question why Americans don't respect Malcolm X, or we don't remember him that much as they do remember to Martin Luther King.
Right. So there were a number of reasons. First of all, Malcolm X was never a significant figure for most African Americans, even in the 60s. He was well known in New York City, he was well known in Chicago, but throughout the rest of the country, most African Americans just didn't know him, didn't pay much attention to him. He was the primary spokesman and person of the Nation of Islam. Most African Americans, probably 85 to 90%, are Christians.
Yes.
So they didn't really see the value of Islam compared to Christianity. While admittedly Christianity was the religion of the slave masters, it was also the religion that we reinterpreted for our own purposes. And blacks in America analogize themselves to the children of Israel in Pharaoh's Egypt in bondage. So his Islamic appeal was never one that many black people in America really were impressed by. But then again, the other problem I think that Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam had is their ultimate plan for liberation of the black community was a separation of blacks from whites, the creation of a separate black homeland in the southeastern part of the United States. As a prelude to that, we would go into our own separate neighborhoods. But the problem was that there was the segregation and the separate neighborhoods that black people were fighting against in the 50s and the 60s. So the nation was effectively saying, let's double down on segregation, let's make ourselves even more segregated. And that just wasn't a message that a group committed to fighting segregation was going to be very receptive to.
So like many people here, when we talk about the Dalit movement, Bahujan movement, they also don't want to have any link with the others. And many people say, yes, we have to engage with the so-called non-Dalits and other communities also. So do you think like Martin Luther King was more into resolving the conflict and bringing them together?
Well, the problem that we have as African Americans is if we're separate from whites, then we can easily be victimized.
Okay.
We can have resources reduced. It's much more easier to target us. But what we found is when we're integrated with whites, they put their interest above ours. So neither one of them is a good strategy because both of them will leave us vulnerable in one way or the other. It's just that when we're integrated, we're less vulnerable to the systematic discrimination that we see. And I think it's because of that I think integration is better for us than separation, although we do need to have our separate spaces where we're able to have our own conversations, educate our own people about the struggle which they're engaged in. But I think in general, there needs to be within the context of an integrated society where we create separate, segregated spaces.
So you say that in certain aspect of life, we need segregation or separate spaces, not exactly segregation, but separate spaces. But broadly, we need integration.
Right, I agree. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
That is the point I was actually narrating to many people about the success of the African Americans movement, or it's called Black movement in America, and I was just linking up how and what kind of lesson that we can learn from there to the Dalit movement here in India.
Let me make this comment. One of the things that has struck me about people talking about the Dalits and what Dalits have or have not done over the last 70 years since independence is there's a strong tendency to want to say, well, here's where African Americans were in the 1950s, here's where Dalits were. Here's where African Americans are in 1917, here's where Dalits are. I think that's the wrong analogy. Segregation was not like the caste-based discrimination that Dalits encountered. The more accurate comparison would be slavery with untouchability or discrimination. Because the thing about segregation, which typically gets overlooked, because it's typically viewed as another form of oppression, which it was. But what it meant was we had these separate black communities, and because we had these separate black communities, we had to develop a multitude of skills for our community. So we had to have some doctors, we had to have some lawyers, we had to have some business people, we had to have newspapers, we had to have radio programs, right? We had to diversify our own abilities in these segregated spaces. So when America moved towards desegregation, we were doing it from a position of already having accumulated a lot of abilities that would be successful in the mainstream. So I think the real difference between Dalits and African Americans is that Dalits didn't have that period of time of a separate development, right? Remember, we had our own schools, our own colleges and universities. Producing our own teachers, our own professors. We had our own organizations that worked on our problems. So you're beginning to see that with the Dalit community now, and particularly with the ones who moved to the urban areas, because ones moving to the urban areas are in some sense replicating the black struggle of creating these separate Dalit neighborhoods where they're going to need some businesses and they're going to need people who are going to be serving these communities, even though those communities don't have
I think that's a very interesting explanation that you've given about segregation and power of it actually, because if the whites are not ready to come to your place, then you have to develop your own doctors, own engineers, own lawyers, and I think that may be the reason why there is no lack of the professionals in the United States from the black community.
Exactly. I think in a real sense, it has been interesting because we went through a cobbler's neighborhood in New Delhi a couple of days ago. And of course, they're not cobblers all anymore. They have different occupations now, but that's sort of what you're talking about is the creation of a Dalit neighborhood, which diversifies its skills in the urban areas. This does not happen in the rural areas, but it can happen, and my sense is it has to happen in the urban areas. The Dalits in the urban areas are likely to go through a prolonged period of segregation in these spaces.
But like in India, after independence, constitutional provisions basically meant for Dalits and other communities like scheduled tribes is the affirmative action program. And in America, you don't have an affirmative action program?
You have reservations, you have quotas, you have a certain percentage of government jobs that are supposed to be filled by Dalits and a certain percentage of positions in public universities that are to be filled by Dalits. We can't have reservations or what we would call quotas. What we can do is maybe or maybe not in employment, but certainly in education, take into account race. So race can be a reason, a factor used in the admissions process. So you can say, well, I have these two candidates for this position, in my university, one is black and one is white. Well, the black one will bring more diversity to my student body. The black one will bring different perspectives, different points of view that will enrich our learning environment. So rather than having another white person, let me have a black person, because the education for everyone will be better. That's what we have with our affirmative action. So it's not as rigid as yours, but then it also means that race is less of a factor, and that the one, I don't know if you want to call it a positive or negative, but let's say an inevitable result of your reservation system is it heightens the importance of caste. Whether you're talking governmental jobs, whether you're talking positions in universities, caste becomes much more important because that's how you get the benefit. So then a discussion about caste becomes important. And this is something that I have not found in discussions about Dalits, which I do find in discussions about African Americans. When I'm listening to educators talking about we have to have Dalit students, they are saying we have to have Dalit students even though we know they're not qualified and they're not adding to the educational environment. Whereas in the United States, the rationale for having African Americans is that they're adding to the educational environment, that they're seeing a different world, and that it's worth it for everyone to see their perspective and their point of view. So it's not we're letting them in because even though we don't think they're qualified, it is we're letting them in because they're bringing something very valuable to the education process because of their different perspective and point of view.
But that can be also, like, if we go, I think that is a very good idea. Why can't we have that kind of a perspective in Indian universities and colleges, where you see the same perspective? There are a huge number of talented youngsters now coming from the Dalit community, and they can bring the perspective.
And I do think that ought to be one of the arguments you make for reservations.
Yes.
And constantly make it. It's not one that's going to be accepted right away, but it's one that you should make, you should continually make. We even ended up doing studies to demonstrate that multiple perspectives and points of view produced a better learning environment.
Yes.
On the job, it produced better decisions. Because what happens is people fall into groupthink, and multiple points of view improves your consideration of all the relevant issues. It'll take time for that to be accepted.
Yes.
And it took time for it to be accepted in the United States.
You know, what happens in India is reservation is considered to be a kind of gift to the non-eligible people.
Right.
So this is a kind of like the Indian suffers what I call from a disease which is called merit.
Mm-hmm.
So we say, we are very meritorious, they are this, and that's where most.
And that's the concept of merit, and using the concept of merit to exclude people. There's no merit in the air, so to speak. There's no objective definition. One thing called merit is a faulty concept. So what happens, and we found this in the United States, was that merit got defined as what white people thought was right and best.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't that black people didn't have merit, it was that black people weren't like white people. Well, of course we're not like white people because we're not white people. So for Dalits to accept merit without talking about the bias inherent in the merit itself is a huge mistake.
Yes.
Because you put yourselves at a disadvantage you shouldn't feel like you're at.
Yes.
You know, our black kids don't score as high on our tests for schools as our white kids. But every time I talk to them, I say, look, the problem's not with you, it's with the test.
Okay.
It's the test that favors whites.
Okay.
And therefore the test puts you at a disadvantage because you're not white.
Yes. In India, the merit argument is basically to keep the what we call the Brahminical hegemony in knowledge and public sphere.
Yes. very much so. And this is something I found to be pretty universal.
Okay.
So when I studied the Black struggle in South Africa, the Black struggle in the United Kingdom, or what's happened with Arab Israelis in Israel, it's the same. All of them are told by the dominant group, you don't have the merit, you're not as smart, here are our tests to prove it. But this is a worldwide phenomenon. Oppressed people never do as well on tests created by their oppressors as the oppressors do. So if you accept their definition of merit, you've really lost, because you can never really have as much merit as they do, because they're the ones defining what merit is.
How are the issues of racial discrimination and caste discrimination, if you want to interrelate them? Like in America, the acceptance of blacks as a people, as a meritorious, as an equal citizen. And in India, because you've been traveling, you've been reading Dalit, acceptance as a simple citizen who is as meritorious, as less meritorious as everybody else.
The first thing that one learns when you study the Dalit struggle, if you're African American, or the African American struggle if you're Dalit, is that oppression carries with it a whole belief system that makes the oppression seem as if it is the natural order of things. The oppressor isn't sitting there going, I think I'm oppressing these people. The oppressor is sitting there going, given reality, this is just how it turns out. It's not that there's something wrong with me, and I'm sorry about there being something wrong with them, but this is how it is. So I think the first thing you learn is that oppression comes with a set of beliefs, a set of attitudes, a set of opinions that makes the oppression look like it's normal. The second thing I think you learn is that in human societies, oppression is originally based in religion.
Okay.
For the African American, we were victimized by Christianity, and the Christians had to have a justification how they could enslave us. So they latched onto a story out of Genesis of a curse that Noah placed upon his son Ham, who he said, you will be the servant of my other two sons, Shem and Japheth. And Ham, according to white Christians, was black. So we were enslaved because we had been cursed by God himself. I think the third thing you learn is that you can only break out of oppression by applying a logic that seems to be illogical to the oppressor. As long as everything you're doing makes sense to the oppressor, then you are likely to still be oppressed, because you're trying to break not them as a people, but the thought system that they're deeply embedded in. From my interaction with caste Hindus, I still think that the idea that it links this whole system together is reincarnation.
Yes.
It's the fact that they believe in reincarnation that is the underlying rationale for the whole system.
Yes.
If reincarnation did not exist, the irrationality of the system would be obvious.
That is why, actually, when Dr. Ambedkar embraced Buddhism, or say, I'm reinventing or returning to our old faith, where he has what you call Navayana, so a new way of life, was very radical and humanist. Because that challenged the myth of reincarnation theory.
Exactly.
Now, I want to ask, like here, in the radical Dalit movement or radical Ambedkarite movement, I would say that way, one thing that we learned is questioning the religious text. The annihilation of caste became one of the biggest work which challenges the caste hegemonic viewpoint. Do you have that kind of, I didn't find that, but we're saying that Christianity justified the black oppression. So was there any movement of that challenges the dominance of Christianity or religious text?
So what happened in Christianity was there was a debate about the meaning of the text. So it wasn't that we as black people abandoned Christianity, rather we went to other aspects, other stories in Christianity, so where Well, for example, the slave master might say, well, look, you're cursed to be a slave. We went to the story of the freedom of the children of Israel being led out of Egypt by Moses to say, no, 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 no. We're like the children of Israel. We're in Pharaoh's land and we're slaves in Pharaoh's land, but God is going to send us a deliverer. So while they might quote provisions in the Bible that claim we're cursed, we would quote provisions in the Bible that claim that we are the children, the true children of God, that we are the ones who have the true religion, and that yours is a perversion of Christianity. Indeed, if I think of people like Black revolutionaries like Nat Turner, for example, what he would do is he would look at God helps those who help themselves.
Yeah.
Right? If you're going to be free of slavery or oppression, you have to be the one who's working to get it done. God only helps you if you help yourself. Don't wait for God. So they had one aspect of Christianity, we had a different one. They, of course, thought that we were following the false beliefs, and we, of course, thought. Okay. So if we go back to someone like Nat Turner or some of the other Black freedom fighters, they would point to Christianity and they would say, God helps those who help themselves. You know, if you want to be liberated from slavery, you have to take the first step. You have to be involved. He will help us if we go forward with it. So what we saw was an interpretation of Christianity by us that was different from the interpretation that whites had. They wanted to use the religion as a way to justify slavery and our oppression. We use the religion to justify our struggle for our liberation and freedom.
Okay, so it's basically the interpretation was different, but blacks never felt that the Christianity is like kind of bulldozing them or kind of, you know.
No, and I think the other thing about Christianity is it also gave the slaves a language that they could talk to the slave masters. You know, if you wanted to say, slave master, I shouldn't have to work on Sunday, you had to be a Christian, right? You know, if you were Muslim or traditional African religions, you couldn't ask for Sunday off. Or they could say, well, you know, slave master, you know, God tells you to be a kind slave master. You want to do your religious duty too. So it gave the slave a language that had a moral code to it that they could at least assert to help with some of the worst aspects of slavery.
So unlike India, where, you know, Ambedkar wanted to question the religious text, the Shastras and the thing that saying that those texts which are like not according to the modern human values should be deleted. There was no such questioning by the Black movement or its leaders of the Bible.
I think, in fact, the other thing I think I would say is, you know, if you were traditional African beliefs, when you died, you moved into the world of the ancestors. So you would still physically be in the same space if that happens where you were enslaved. Which would therefore mean that your suffering wouldn't end with death. But Christianity now says, well, no, when you die, you'll be judged, you may go to heaven, and that means after this world, there's another world that's likely to be a better world. That was something that traditional beliefs didn't give them, and Christianity did. So in that sense, Christianity said there'll be an end to your suffering in a way that their own beliefs did.
So do you think that the Christianity overall actually subdued the radical, challenging spirit of the Black movement?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. And this is something I have to say, I don't think very many whites in the United States understand. The Black experience in the United States was of two kinds. Yes, there was this aspect where we were victimized because of our race. We were enslaved. We were segregated. We were discriminated against. I mean, the race is the characteristic of the oppression. But at the same time that we were being oppressed, we also created a counter narrative, a counter story. And in that counter story, we're not inferior as they would have you believe. we're oppressed.
Yes.
So we're going to struggle against our oppression. In some sense, if you ask me what African American culture is,
Yeah.
I would say it's resistance to our oppression.
Yeah.
That it's a culture that really is only held together by a fight against racism. So I don't think Christianity or anything really dampened that spirit. I think that's the essence of the African American culture, is resistance to racial oppression.
Okay, because most of the time this question people ask, like in India, there are intercaste marriages happening now, and marriages are broken also. Sometime, like you might have heard in the last few years, huge number of what we called dishonored killing. Because we don't call honored killing, but it's basically a caste-based arrogance that comes and reflects. And it's not just among the upper caste and the Dalits, but within different communities. Actually. It's basically one community. If it marries to the boy marries to the other community girl, or the girls, so it's people are even ready to kill their own children. And somewhere many people are saying that our children should not get married to outside, and this basically the same stereotypical things are coming, where the social scientists themselves are saying now, oh, we have to save our children, so don't go and get outside. Don't get in touch with the other boys or girls, because ultimately if you come into a relationship, then you will be lynched or killed because of your different caste status. How do you feel like as an American citizen now? Because I've seen like in America or Europe, there is much more into this marriages, interracial marriages, a lot of things. What is the experience?
Now we're starting to talk about one of the big differences between the Dalit struggle and the African American struggle, because the African American struggle is a struggle that takes place within a culture that is an anti-traditional individualist culture. Whereas if you came and you said, well, what's the core of the African American culture? I would say it's the struggle against racism. The core of American culture is individual self-determination.
Yes.
It is the idea that it is up to the individual to figure out how best to live his or her own life, and that indeed the whole point of living is to do and follow what you think is appropriate for you to do and follow, as long as you don't interfere with other people's ability to do the same.
Yeah.
So the individualism manifests itself in so many different ways when you're talking about the struggle between Dalits, and it manifests itself in so many different ways. One way is our marriages are two individuals coming together. Our marriages are contracts. They're contracts with an indefinite term. So if any person decides I don't like the contract anymore, I walk away from it. They're not.
So marriage is not sacrosanct.
It's not sacrosanct. When you talk about, and as I said, when you talk about the marriages, individuals, it's not families.
Yes.
My father, my mother may or may not like my new wife. But that's not going to keep me from marrying her. And indeed, I'm going to expect that they like her, or if not, then we just won't associate with each other. Interracial marriage becomes that way because you find your own individual partner, and it's in a context of a society that says you don't have to follow tradition. When we say people are individuals, what we're really saying is you don't have to follow tradition. So it's an anti-traditional culture in the sense of saying, look, don't let the past bind you. And hence the American, I would tend to describe the Indian as a person with one foot in the past and one foot in the present. The American has a foot in the present, but the other foot's in the future. So Americans are sort of people who believe fundamentally in progress. So they believe today is better than yesterday, and tomorrow will be better than today. And the further back into time things were, the worse. And the further into the future, the better. So the further back you go, the less reason there is to figure that you're going to learn anything from it, because that was too long ago. So there's a liberation in our culture that's not in Indian culture. And that was always very important to the African American struggle, because we could always say, and they would have had to listen to us say, all men are created equal.
Yes.
Okay, that's what that means us too. So there was always that ethic of individuality and equality. So what we're seeing is we're seeing substantial increases in interracial marriages among blacks. There was a study that was done in 2015 that showed that fully 24% of black males who married in 2014 married outside the race, and 9% of black females.
Okay.
I was just looking at statistics today. If I'm talking about black children under the age of 10 now, 20%, 1 in 5 of them is mixed race.
Okay.
That's just going to increase as the years go on. So we're seeing a massive change in the black community because of interracial marriages and interracial dating, I should say, or mating, have disestablished our traditional race notion. And the last thing I think I would point out on this, which I think is very, very critical, race was always presupposed to be immutable.
Okay.
You can't change it, and people know your race when they see you.
Yes.
If you go back to 1960, 99.4% of Americans were either black or white.
Okay.
So if you had any color at all, they said, yeah, you're black.
Yeah.
No. Today, with immigration from Latin America, with immigration from South Asia, from the Middle East, it's difficult to tell the race of a lot of people.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, that means now that when you're present, people don't necessarily know your race. Now, they know mine, okay? But there's plenty of black people who get asked the question all the time, what are you?
Yes.
Which means people don't know what their race is. And for those people, they can respond in a number of different ways. So what we're seeing also is that race is moving from a characteristic that was ascribed by our society to one that individuals choose.
But that brings me to a very important question. When you say that American society is changing, working in present, looking for future. And in India, we actually live in past most of the time.
Yes.
And glorification of the past.
Yes.
Past has to be golden.
Yes.
And everybody, that's why the new things are coming up, which is glorifying all wretched traditions, which degrade human being, but we still trying to, justify. Now, one thing that is, they enjoy the democratic society, they enjoy a society which has given them an opportunity to progress and succeed, earn as much of money as you want, without any restriction on your going, what you want to eat, what you want to dine, with whom, where, and when. The same kind of Indian American people, they want to ghettoize now India. The ghettos in their own circles.
Right.
In India, they want to support a kind of a Hindutva nationhood, which exclude the minority, which exclude the Dalits, which exclude the marginalized. And the two most defamatory terms in India that they have made is, one is secularism and other is human rights. So anybody who say I am a secular, I am a human rights defender, you will get used a lot of abuses, criticism, and we are presented that we are the most liberal society which has given so much of right to minorities and marginalized that these people have now what we call in our sense gone limitless and too much of appeasement to them, and that is why we need to control them. So why is that the Indians in America have not been able to move beyond the caste and community confines? Have you come across people who suffer racial prejudices in America?
Well, of course. What I would say in the American historical context, the first generation holds on to the traditions. And they're somewhat successful passing those traditions down to their children. They're almost not successful at all at passing it down to their grandchildren. In the American Indian community is a relatively new community. You're looking at maybe second generation, maybe you're still first generation, which is to say, give them time in the United States culture and they will abandon their traditional Hindu beliefs. We see this all the time, that when immigrant groups come, the children and the grandchildren are fighting the parents and the grandparents because they're becoming American, which the parents and the grandparents abhor. They're moving away from traditional values, but that's what I'm saying. America is an anti-traditional society. So it's sort of like, slowly wearing away someone's cultural belief system with individualism, and it will take time. And I have run into many Indians who seem to think that Hinduism is different, it's special, and this won't happen to their grandchildren, and I can tell you it will, and they'll know it too. Which will put them further and further apart from the Indians who are in India who are practicing Hinduism, because American society cannot help but see the caste system as utterly abhorrent. The caste system is against everything Americans believe in. Americans believe in the individual, not in the individual being a member of a caste group, being told this is the occupation you should do, this is the community you should live in, these are the people you should dine with, these are the people you should marry. All of these are just abhorrent ideas to the American.
Yeah, but the thing is that if you read the recent studies, reports that are coming up, that Indians have taken their caste abroad. Even the Sikhs have taken their caste. The Hindus already have.
Yes, everyone does. But I'm saying they are in an anti-traditional cauldron that is slowly going to be working its way against them. I have no doubt that if you were to compare Indians in the United States with Indians in India, the Indians in the United States are much more likely to be involved in love marriages and much less likely to be paying dowry, much more likely for the women to be holding positions of authority than what's over here in India. I have no doubt at that at all. And as time goes on, the differences between the American Indian and the Indian are going to be more and more striking.
Because what happened is that after the resurgence of the Hindutva, with the government at different level, we are witnessing a kind of reintroduction of those rigid beliefs and the hate projects here in India, which comes up in various forms, are actively supported by the non-resident Indians, whether in Canada, whether in the United States or United Kingdom. These are the places where from we are receiving all the trolls in the internet, the Twitter, or the hate mails, or the lot of groups are. So that is where the concern is.
Because, and as I said, this can't help but change for the American. You have to understand that to the American, the Indian caste system is evil. Because it's a restraint upon individual self-determination. The very essence of the caste system is in fundamental conflict with American individualism. So they can't even tell their white friends what they're doing. Their white friends go, this is what you really think? This is how you really believe? And they'll be criticized by their white friends. You don't even have to worry about anyone else. I mean, this means that they have to live almost a secret society in a society that believes in openness. No, I would say what you're pointing to is a problem that over time will get cured.
So you think that it will be...
I have no doubt of that. None at all.
Okay.
I have no, and I'm certain if the studies were looked at, you would see differences between, let's say, the second generation Indians in the United States compared to the ones here.
When you're talking about caste system, you said you differentiate the segregation, and you're talking about it. It should be compared with slavery. A few years back, I had attended an international conference on untouchability in London. It was about in 2009, I suppose. And there I found a lot of people from countries like Nigeria and other countries where they described that even among the blacks there was slavery, and there were very
Yes.
different kind of segregations.
Yes. Well, slavery was very common in Africa. In the United States, there are records of some blacks who owned slaves. Now, it's a little more complicated because a lot of times a black person might own a slave, but that slave might be a family member.
Yeah. Oh.
So it's a way to buy the family member's freedom by saying, I'm going to hold you as a slave because the laws won't let me emancipate you, but at least you'll be my slave, which means you'll be free. Although there were some blacks who actually held slaves. In the black community, though, I would say in the United States, I think one of the divisions that we've seen, let me think. Today we see divisions between Africans and African Americans, between Caribbeans and African Americans.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And that makes perfect good sense. If I'm from Ghana, if I'm from Nigeria, if I'm from Jamaica, if I'm from Trinidad, I didn't grow up in a society with white racism. So there's no particular reason for me to be troubled by white racism when I come to the United States. And I don't understand it. So they have a very different cultural experience than African Americans. Now, as we're going to find out with Indians, and we see this with immigrant blacks, the first generation is very separate from the African American community. The second generation is too, but less so.
Okay.
But the third generation identifies with African Americans. So over a period of time, they become African American. Another division in the black community besides this ethnic division is a color division. Obviously lighter skinned blacks tended to have some kind of white parent, like probably a slave master. And if you're a slave master and you're going to favor one slave over another, why don't you favor your child as opposed to one of your other slaves? So we found that historically the mixed race blacks, even the slaves, did better. Mixed race blacks seem to be about 15% of blacks during slavery, but a third of the free blacks were mixed race blacks. And I think there is still a color prejudice among African Americans where lighter skin is favored. And this is particularly true with women. To a lesser extent men, but there is an extent that it's favored even among men. So I don't want to say, in fact, indeed, I'll give you another troubling division in the black community. About 25 years ago, there was this movement called intersectionality in the black community where black women talked about they were victimized by both race and gender. Thus, they weren't like white women nor black males. And we play that forward 25 years now, and when you look at the black family structure now, it really is no longer mother, father, children. The basic black family structures now are single professional black women, single black women with children, this two-parent family with maybe their own children, or maybe just the mother's children or the father's children, or blended families. But very few black families now are your traditional mother, father, these are the two kids. Probably not more than 10% of black families today.
The narratives that you are saying, that whites are feeling they have been denied and discriminated, It's a similar way here in India that the Hindutva forces actually unleashed whole campaign against the Muslims. And the whole thing is that the Muslims have got everything, they have been appeased. Now we don't know the appeasement because all the reports in India, even the government of India appointed commissions, suggest that the Muslims are the most marginalized in this country. They have been discriminated at jobs, but the whole narratives everywhere, somewhere it looks like it is suitable. And that's why we are seeing that current democratic dispensation in this country has that the Hindu revivalism. And the dominant communities are changing the narratives.
Yeah, right. And it may be that, as I said, I mean, I know in the United States right now are dark times. You know, my hope is that sanity returns quickly. And it may be that Donald Trump making all the mistakes that he makes allows that to occur. But we will see if this could either be the last gasp of whites holding on to power, or it could be a reversion back to whites being in control for a long time. And I think in the United States, I think it's too early to tell right now. We'll get some sense of the 2018 election, but we'll definitely know with the 2020 elections.
Yeah, because the one thing that I am optimistic about the United States is the way the media and the intellectual, the public intellectual in the discourse have actually taken on Donald Trump.
Well, this is why it's critical, because this could work one of two ways. One way is that the populace believes the media and says there's something wrong with Donald Trump.
Yes.
The other is that the populace says there's something wrong with the media. And if that occurs, then Donald Trump will be able to do whatever he wants.
But what is happening in India is actually the absolute surrender, not just surrender. The media has become a kind of flappy dog of the establishment. And it is not just demonizing the opponents. Anybody who is speaking about human rights, anybody who is speaking about social justice, anybody who is speaking about peace with our neighboring countries, including Pakistan, it's been termed as, you know, anti-national. And this whole concept, and in the studios you have debate and you have right-wing intellectuals coming up and demonizing, and you are cooking up stories inside the studios.
That's troublesome.
So that's very disturbing actually.
Right, because if the media is going to play up this conservative term by the government, that's a real problem. Because there's no way to counteract that. That's more troublesome than our situation right now. But I'm not, as I said, I mean, there is the real possibility that Americans conclude we can't trust the media, but we can trust Trump, or at least that we can't trust the media. And then at that point he's on his way to becoming an imperial president. That's why it's been very interesting to see what's happened since he fired the FBI director.
Yes.
Because to be able to get away with that, if he does, that would be huge too. So, we're concerned, and we're concerned even though the media is keeping up its attack on Trump. There's Fox News Channel, which sees it's totally different.
Yes.
But the other major news networks have been very critical.
Yeah, in America it's like Fox News is one and there are others who are challenging. In India it's kind of the others who are challenging are very few. They are also very submissive and unable to speak up against even if they speak against the government, they can't speak up against the Prime Minister. Because the Prime Minister is the most sacrosanct at the moment. We saw in the universities in your country and here, the government's first target was the universities. So the Jawaharlal Nehru University, which was actually a little bit of hopeful, we say among the Indian universities, it was there, the student was still challenging the popular notion. That became the most demonized kind of a university. And the government is cutting all support for the student. Like annual there were about 1100 PhDs from JNU, but this year the grant has been cut and they have been reduced to 120, 130. So you can and all the departments in the universities which teach actually, which are the department for social exclusion, they have been actually in the target of the government to deny them further assistance.
Well, see, if the media goes along with it, that's troublesome because you lost your watchdog.
So like what is the hope for us that way? If the media is out, academics are in the target, the students are being denied rights. So what do we do?
You have to continue to agitate. You have to continue to protest, and you might be doing that waiting for something to happen. So that when something happens, you're in position to take advantage of it. But the short term may not look good if the media lines up with the conservative, reactionary government. That's a problem. Yeah, that's a problem. If our media was lining up with Donald Trump, I think there'd be legitimate concern about the future of American democracy.
So one thing about like when we come about the movements, the last 2 years we had seen a lot of protests in India, protests where students were denied. You might have heard about Rohit Pemuda, the Dalit student, who was institutionally murdered, I would say. And there were other students and everywhere there was so much of protest. But these protests also after certain times disappear because there is a limit to protesting also. When the state doesn't listen. What does the student have? Now there are a number of Dalit students who commit suicide. And this is a big challenge now. In the institutions where caste discriminations are rampant and in different forms. Because there are a lot of pressure, and as I said, this merit argument many times put tremendous pressure on the people from the rural background, particularly. Non-English speaking background, they remain under constant gaze of the so-called academic, and it's so disturbing. What should the academic or those who think about this, how can we stop?
Well, I don't know the kind of support programs that exist for your students with lower academic credentials, but certainly that's what are needed are programs to support those students once they come in. So tutors, mentors, enough financial aid, positive networks, and those are things that universities can't create if they're out to create them. They're going to cost the university some money, but they can create them. But that is what would be needed. Is we're going to do what we can to make certain that these students succeed. So if that means more tutors, if that means letting them take fewer hours, if that means mentors, peer mentors, if that means helping them get internships, we'll do that.
You see, what happens in this country is the absolute loss of trust between the Dalit and OBC students or Adivasi students with the non-community teachers. Because in the academic sphere also, when you're talking about America, you say that we want people from diverse sections so that they bring their knowledge to us, and we know we are like it increases our knowledge system and whatever you can say.
Right.
But here, bringing you are always seen as an outsider if you enter into the domain or a kitchen of a person, and even if a few people are appointed in the universities, they always remain a kind of outsider. Right. And that is the gap that continuously now happening. Now there are not even 1% teachers of different communities who can win the trust of the Dalits or the OBC student or the marginalized student, because they always feel that they come with their caste prejudices.
Right. That's a problem. I mean, that's a problem, right? In theory, you'd have programs to help train Dalits to become professors, to help diversify the academy. I know that doesn't happen very much here because I've seen the numbers. So That's a problem. I ran into this in South Africa, for example, when after the struggle was won against apartheid, the university professors remained.
Yes, same.
And they controlled who became new professors through granting and denying tenure. So, many blacks didn't make it through that process. So even today, the professor is predominantly white and from the apartheid era, and it's a problem. It's a big problem. It's a huge problem. I mean, like I said, the solution would be programs that are going to help Dalits get the credentials necessary to become teachers, but those programs tend to take a few years before they start paying.
Like even in the city of Varanasi, if you visit the Banaras Hindu University, the teachers there are absolutely, the vice chancellor, the teachers, the traditional teachers. So they have like in the university campus, the girls can't eat non-vegetarian food. They can't remain outside after a certain point of time. Say of 7 o'clock they are denied. In America, in your university, you teach law. You must have even the white students. You must have even the Indian student or say African or different. Is there a gap of trust if a white student come to you and they speak to you?
I would suspect so. I would suspect that white students don't trust me as much as black students.
Okay.
I'm not. I tell them.
Yeah. Okay.
I say, look, I'm African American. That means, and I'm saying I'm African American. I identify with African American. They are my people, and there's so rarely that one of us gets to the position of being a professor at a university or a law school like this.
Okay.
I have special obligations and duties to that community. I am your professor, and I have obligations and duties to you too.
Yes.
But I also have obligations and duties to this other community. So I suspect that white students probably are not as comfortable coming to me as they would be going to someone white. But then again, black students would be more comfortable.
So now that comes to bring to me a personal question. You say you're married to a white woman.
I was. Not now. But it was.
You are. So were that like in your marriage, there might have been the conflict, there might have been always happen. So are these conflict when you marry, interracial marriages, when we say like intercaste marriages, people say that we should not do, many people actually support that we should not engage in the outside casting because we all bring our prejudices and it sometimes clashes. So do you believe that we should not go for that or interracial things are okay?
Well, I do think it's more difficult to marry someone out of your race, and I would suspect out of your caste. I would suspect that that's probably right. That married couples are going to have disagreements about a lot of things, and intercaste marriage, interracial marriage is going to add to the number of disagreements. But at the same time, that's real, true integration and change. And if you don't have it, the caste system, or in our case, race, remains a very rigid concept that doesn't change. I think the reason the future of the race struggle in the United States is going to change is precisely because of growing interracial marriages. And in fact, if you look at the plight of black women now, especially educated black women, there just simply aren't enough black males to go around. So if black women don't seriously think about marrying outside of race, they just simply won't be married. In the black community, when you get over the age of 25, 55% of blacks are female. And then of the 45% that are males, a significant percentage of ours are going to end up in prison or within the criminal justice system. And even when they come out, their job prospects are going to be very limited. Yes. So you probably start at 55, 45, and then you're probably eliminating another 10% of those black males down to 35. And then more black males are going to marry whites and outside the race and black females. So now you're down to, maybe 30. So it's something if black women aren't seriously dating or thinking about dating white men, they won't find husbands. Just aren't enough black men to go around anymore.
Okay. So, but my point is like in India also, and do you think that the self-arranged marriages?
Well, that's the problem. In India, that's the problem. We conceptualize marriage as two individuals coming together in a contract. You see it as the merging of two families.
And it's for the 7 lives.
Right. It's a very difficult problem, and as long as marriages are arranged, the caste system will survive, right?
Because marriage system is basically to protect caste system. Right. But what about if the oppressor themselves don't want to marry outside? Then what happens?
Well, that's a problem too. Certainly, we see that. Once again, black men will marry outside the race, but black women won't. Part of the reason black women won't is one, there's this history of exploitation of black women by white slave masters. Okay. But secondly, white men are less likely to go after black women. Mm-hmm. Racism functions in our societies in many ways. Mm-hmm. One of the ways it functions is it says white women are more attractive because they're white. Therefore, the black woman is sort of stigmatized with not being as attractive. Okay. And the ones who tend to be played up as attractive tend to be the ones closest to white, so lighter skin, longer hair. Mm-hmm. So you have this effort to say this is the standard, at least we can agree with, but it makes it difficult for the dark-skinned women. This is a problem for us as well.
Final question, very important one. Now, you might have heard when you were in Delhi, a student from African countries actually have been protesting against, and they have been speaking India as a racist country. And they say India is the most racist country. Of course, government of India actually rejected that whole thing. But that notion is there, and the fact is there. Because you don't get in houses, and anybody who let you on rent will exorbitantly charge money, much more than any other person. And they have been speaking against how the students are considered as druggists and even cannibalists. Mm-hmm. So it's like a very serious thing. How you might have come across Indians many times in United States, in India, across any caste community, whatever. How do you find Indians behave?
Well, first let me confirm very much. Yeah. You're very right. India is extraordinarily racist towards Africans.
Extraordinarily.
I have yet to talk to an African student here who is not complaining about racism in India, and I see it with people who interact with me until they find out I'm American. Mm-hmm. And once they find out I'm American, I'm in a different category, and they probably try to exploit and take money from me. But I'm not treated as negatively as Africans. I think it's been really strange watching the Indian community in the United States. Because the Indian community in the United States is mostly upper caste Hindus. So they're extraordinarily privileged. They're used to being honored and treated with tremendous respect. Yeah. They tend to have a racist streak too.
Have you ever felt that you have been racially discriminated or seen in India or abroad? Any kind of
Yes, of course. As I said, without question. The only time as it changes when they know I'm American. That's why I constantly say I'm American. I don't speak any Indian dialect because I want to get out. I'm American, so I don't want to speak Hindi or Marathi for them to think maybe he's African, he learned the language. I want to come out very quickly. I'm American, I'm English, I don't understand the language. You see, I'm American, I'm telling you that.
Yeah, if you say that you are from Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Uganda, then the maybe the pattern or the feeling will change.
Right, totally. the one African country it seems to me that Indians are less racist about is South Africa.
Yes.
And that's the only one. All of the others, tremendous racism.
So what do you think that how to overcome these kind of things?
Well, I don't, in some sense, it's not just India. Asian countries have a very,
Problem is the Asian
right,
countries.
whether you're talking Japan or China,
Even Korea.
yeah, it's, so I suspect what that means is African people, certainly African American people, will stay away from moving to places like this.
Yes.
This would be, if I were African, and I have lived in India, so I can't say that I had really great problems when I was here. But once again, people knew I was American. But I would think if I were African, this would not be my first destination to come to. It would be after the United States, after UK, after Canada, after Australia, maybe after some other places if I spoke French. So I would not suspect a lot of Africans or African Americans would quote unquote settle in India, and if they did, they wouldn't do it for a very long period of time.
But that means that when we talk about that Europeans, particularly the British or French or all these countries are the biggest racist country. I think we are the biggest Ambedkar hypocrite that way. More racist than the British could be or the French could be.
I would say so. I mean, I lived in London too, and I would definitely say that the racism I've encountered in India is far greater than what I encountered in London. Far greater. It's not even comparable.
so London remain a better place to
far better. I could live in London.
Of course, that is it.
Yeah, New Delhi would be different. Yes.
And Canada is definitely better.
Well, I would think so. Now, I haven't spent much time in Canada, so I can't really speak on any personal experience, but just sort of my experience with the Anglo world, as racist as they were and as negative as their policies impacted so many, I have found the racism that exists in India to be greater.
So India remain one of the biggest, or maybe the greatest racist country. What can the whole Ambedkarite movement in India learn from these experiences? Because when you talk about racism, actually we are most casteist. I got it, like 3/4 of Indian population suffer from caste system. So it's just a 5% Indians actually who dominate the others. Actually, India itself is a victim of caste system and racism. So I think when I was speaking to some of the African friends, I was saying that you people are right, but you must understand that 3/4 of our population that suffer from this racism, which is caste system. So you have to also change the attitude and bring the caste notion into the international forum.
Right. Well, that I very much agree. I mean, I very much agree that the caste-based oppression that Dalits are suffering under is only going to be eliminated by outside oppression.
Yes.
That globalizing the Dalit struggle is a necessary part of that struggle. This is not something you will be able to do on your own without allies who are not in India. You just don't have enough mechanisms of power to be able to successfully fight. So I do think that publicizing internationally the Dalit struggle is absolutely critical to that struggle. I think you continue with the notion that, look, your people need to reject the Indian caste system. They need to reject Hinduism because Hinduism is built on the caste system. I would not argue about whether or not Dalits should be Hindus. I would just simply say they should not be. I think you're right to say we should convert to Buddhism or another religion, but certainly Buddhism. And I just say I have seen many more representations of Dr. Ambedkar over the 20 years I've been coming here. I think that's a very positive development because he stands for self-respect for Dalit. So that's the kind of thing that I think you continue to do. I think you continue to try to generate money within the Dalit community. I'm a very strong believer in Dalit capitalism. I know there's some people who think capitalism is evil. But in a society like India,
you have to build up new entrepreneurs and community development, all those kind of things. It doesn't necessarily mean the whole Banya capitalism.
Right. And in fact, I would suspect that one of the things we as African Americans learned, and why we never really became Marxists, is because Marx presumed that race was simply a function of the capitalist system. And our experience told us it wasn't.
He didn't talk about it actually much.
Right. That people can be racist with capitalism without it.
Absolutely.
So eliminating capitalism will not eliminate racism. And in a society where materialism is becoming more and more important, money is a source of power. And if Dalits give up on that source of power, it will harm them. I think education is as best you can do it because there are tremendous obstacles in the way of Dalit education. I think Dalits should in fact continue to argue when it comes to reservations the benefit that everyone gets from that Dalit perspective, that somebody who sees the system from a different perspective and point of view. And don't accept the argument that, well, this is a gift, this is because you're not qualified, but we're well-meaning people.
The last point that you, in your answers to my question, you said that we have to bring those people into our movement who may not agree with our viewpoints.
I think that's right.
Because that was a little bit confusing to me, but I wanted to read.
Yes, you need numbers. It has been one of our issues as a minority in a democratic society, and Barack Obama's presidency proved it. He was to be president. You're very powerful. There are a lot of things you can get done. But there are limits to what you can get done if you don't have the other people joining you. So politically, what a group that's only at most 20% of the population can get done is limited, and you're going to need other people.
So other people means other people supporting your movement.
Other people,
not necessarily.
Even if they don't support your movement, a congruence of interest.
There could be some commonality of interest.
Right. So
convergence of interest.
Sort of take the American Civil War. There was Lincoln who wanted to hold the Union together. And there were those people who wanted to eliminate slavery. They came together. That didn't mean that the people who wanted to hold the Union together wanted to end slavery. And it didn't mean that the people who wanted to end slavery cared about the Union. But together they won the war. So you're looking for people where your interest and their interest converge, even though your explanation for what it is you want done is different. They're your allies for this battle, not for the next one, but for this one, we can agree, let us work together.
So that means that for a wider movement, we have to find new allies and who can agree to a common minimum program, we say.
I agree. Well, no, I don't want to say common program. They can, let them fight for what they want to fight for, and you fight for what you want to fight for. But the goal is to get to wherever you want to be.
There should be some convergence of some interest. Of both the sides have to have certain point of interest which they feel that is important for them to go together.
The interest being the outcome.
Not
how you explain how you get there, why it's important.
Okay, so thank you very much for your time and